one of the things I've noticed in the NCCN guidelines I've had questions about is that if a patient is on a cytoreductive therapy, whether it be interferon or hydroxyurea, and let's assume that they're having adequate control of their blood counts and tolerating therapy, just having another thrombotic event requires a switch to therapy. And I'm wondering, is that really necessary? And how do you make that, and what do you switch to? Ruben?
It's an excellent question. I think it depends a bit on the circumstance. Is it a new thrombotic event in a different vascular distribution? Or is it extension of a prior clot? So if it was a DVT, sometimes it's difficult to know, is this an extension of a prior clot? Is it a new clot, in a different area? Were the counts controlled at the time that they had the second event or not? So I do really try to see, is it a failure of the therapy, or is it a failure of some other thing, or was it really a true event? Without question, in terms of second-line therapy, we now have an FDA-approved second-line therapy in the therapy of ruxolitinib for individuals with PV. That too can be indicated clearly in that second-line setting, and in particularly is helpful if they have splenomegaly symptoms or more difficult disease-associated features. In the studies, there is a suggestion also of further protection against thrombotic events. Those studies were not necessarily powered for thrombosis as a primary endpoint, but there is some thought that decreases in inflammation and other aspects that may be improved by the JAK1, JAK2 inhibition might be beneficial in terms of thrombosis prophylaxis.
Okay, Jamil, what would cause you to switch from whatever cytoreductive therapy you're on to another one, ruxolitinib or interferon, if you're on hydroxyurea, other than thrombotic events?
I think it has to do with the tolerability of the cytoreductive therapy and the results that I'm looking for. So if the patient is unable to tolerate hydroxyurea, I've had a patient who had significant allergic reaction to the drug, so I have no a way to do it but to switch to ruxolitinib in this instance. And also if somebody is developing unexpected, or I should say untoward side effects from the doses of hydroxyurea that are required to either control their blood counts or constitutional symptoms, or if they start to develop splenomegaly despite being on hydroxyurea or other forms of cytoreduction. So there are a multitude of reasons, and in patients who have PV, I think every patient has to be dealt with individually. And I guess we have to ask ourselves, have we optimized the doses? Have we talked about compliance? Can we up the dose before we make the switch? Because it is a commitment on both the patient and my part to say, okay, now we're ready for part B, if you will. But all of the issues that have been mentioned could lead to a shift in therapy. I think the issue is you need to continue to monitor the treatment and the response to treatment. And that is something that I think may not have been optimized, if you will, because we think PV, it's a chronic disease, patient have very little symptoms, take your hydroxyurea and see you later. So I think it's very important to monitor response to treatment, look at the blood counts, constitutional symptoms, and then say to yourself and talk to the patient about, are we actually optimizing this to the fullest? And then if not, then switch.